And thank you all for joining tonight. Tonight marks the launch of our new spring season at MOCA with exhibitions by Jessica Stockholder, Margot Williamson, Justin Mingyong, and Jenny C. Jones. And it officially opens on April 17th, so please join us. I have the honor of introducing Jessica Stockholder and Julia Dault, and moderating tonight, though they do not need a moderator, but we'll see. Joking. So Jessica Stockholder was born in Seattle, Washington, and currently lives and works in Nanaimo, British Columbia. Her extensive exhibition history spans museums, galleries, and biennial exhibitions, including at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, the Contemporary Austin, the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, Palazzo Cristal at the Reina Sofia in Madrid, Denver Art Museum, the Vancouver Art Gallery, Galleria d'Arte Moderna in Turin, the Whitney Biennial, the Venice Biennale, the Dia Center for the Arts in New York, and the Kunsthalle Zurich. Stockholder's work is included in the permanent collections of numerous institutions, such as the Art Institute of Chicago, Kunstmuseum St. Gallen in Switzerland, Le Consortium in Dijon, France, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, MUMOC in Vienna, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, Netherlands, Vancouver Art Gallery, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Julia Dault is a Toronto-based artist whose paintings and sculptures have been featured in the New Museum's Triennial and the Marrakesh and Gwangju Biennials, as well as in group exhibitions at the Kunstinstituut Melle in Rotterdam, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, the Perez Art Museum in Miami, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, and MOCA Toronto. Her solo exhibition at the Power Plant and the Contemporary Art Gallery Vancouver was accompanied by her first monograph published by Black Dog Press. Her art is included in the permanent collections of the National Gallery of Canada, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, the MCA Chicago, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Art Gallery of Ontario, and the Perez Art Museum Miami. Her public art can be seen in Toronto and soon in Vancouver. So welcome to you both. So I wanted to start this evening by asking you both what your relationship to language and words is, and how this relationship propelled you towards art.
Okay, who should start?
I think you should start.
Okay. I think it's a good question for anybody. I was raised by two English professors who were very involved with words, and I think that and my mother was a lovely person who I miss, and also very argumentative. And I would, of course, lose all the arguments because I was young and she was very sharp and quick in her thinking. And I think that making visual art was a way of finding a place that couldn't be argued with by them, in any case. And they didn't really know what I was doing. And then since then, of course, I mean, for me, language, I don't make things, I don't write things and think words that then yield artworks. I make things and think through the process of making, and then words come into play. I mean, because language is a big piece of being human, and I mean, I think I said this to you earlier. I noticed that when creative writers are invited to give a talk, they read. They read from the things they've written, and then there's a few questions afterwards, where unfortunately us visual artists, we have to show the work and talk, because the work, at least the kind of work that we make, it's silent, so we have to fill the space with all those words. And then teaching, you know, and language is how you communicate with each other about the thing you're looking at. So years ago, I wouldn't title any of the pieces in the studio. I just titled the installation works, like the work that you'll see at MOCA, because they don't exist after the show's over, and it's very hard to put words to something that feel meaningful. That process of titling has grown over the years and entered an effort to write and find ways to speak about the work, and so it's complicated. I could keep talking for a long time, but now it's your turn.
It's fascinating. But also in the show that you're opening, there's language. It plays a really important role in the install.
During the pandemic, I started to write some poems. The time was different for me, certainly, and many people at that time. And I think working with language requires a kind of slowness, where working with materials involves moving around, which is part of why I like to do it. So I started to make poetry and some of which is turned into a kind of concrete poetry, a kind of words involving visuality as well as their sense. And in this show coming up, I've made some, you might call them concrete poets, shaped pieces of words, decals too, you could say they are, and they're in relationship to the show, which I've not done before, yeah.
Which is amazing for an artist as established as you to keep pushing. And like this install, I saw it this morning, you all have to go, has amazing new elements that you've never done before, which I just think is astounding.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
And for you, how's language?
Language for me is very complicated. I was raised by a pretty established art critic who was the art critic for the Globe and Mail for 35 years. My mother was an art teacher for 35 years. And I got into art school when I was 17, full scholarship that I turned down. I kicked my younger self because I thought I didn't know enough about the world to make art. So I did a degree in art history. I still didn't think I knew enough. And then became an art critic for the other national newspaper that swings pretty right, so I'm a little embarrassed about it. I wrote as the critic for the National Post, but they had great arts coverage, so I could justify it. Full page, full color, super rare for visual art. So I wrote about art in an effort to understand the contemporary art object and language that could buoy it or unpack it, or, I mean, the readership of the National Post, you could argue, you know, as a general audience. So what would it mean to write about contemporary art for that audience? And that helped inform how I started to work. So I made art all along, but kind of came out as an artist when I was 29 and moved to New York, in part to escape the history of the words that, you know, I wanted to know that if I became an artist, I would have done it on my own. And had I stayed here, I mean, I was raised in this art world, and we spent weekends going to shows, and it was a great way to grow up, but I needed to find my own voice. So language was really important, and yet I pushed against it when I became an artist fully. And I told you guys this earlier, I think, when I was a critic, you go into a show, and I don't know if you all have experienced this, you look at a piece, and then to fully understand it, you almost feel like you have to rely on the press release. So you read about it, and you look back to the work, and then have a kind of a new understanding. And my challenge when I started making work was, could you make a piece that was more independent from words, that could almost, and you know, it's pretty much impossible, but could exist fully in and of its own. So I started making these kind of plexiglass, these sculptures that are all made on site and have very strict rule sets. But they're all titled based on how long it takes me to make them. And they're all tethered to the wall, so you can see the cords, and you could see behind it, and you could walk around, and sort of, the more you look, the more you would understand. My hope has always been that, so it didn't rely on an external text to inform it. And then the other thing, my relationship to language, was as an artist, how do you get someone to look? Like as a critic, your job is to explain, hopefully, to the reader who then wants to go and see the piece. But as the artist, how do you elongate a viewing experience? Like how do you get, sometimes I go to galleries and I notice I'm like this, like if the work's here, I'm not fully facing it and giving it my full attention. So how do you sort of create a piece that people want to look at, especially now? So I say that's sort of fraught but very complicated relationship to words. Yeah.
And in terms of providing some information, I mean, when I think of words and language, I also think of how you come up with your titles, which I'm just going to read a few of them.
Okay.
Days of Our Lives, Lady Fingers, Electric Slide, Polyglamorous. So I'm curious where these words come from and how much are they a key into the work?
Yeah, it's funny because they're sort of inside jokes. I mean, they're often anchoring to a specific moment in time. Like one painting I did is, I don't think it's included here, but it's called Chasing Waterfalls. Does anyone know that illusion? So if you know it, it kind of anchors you. Do you know it?
No.
See, it sort of anchors you. It's a great TLC song. And the painting, I mean, abstract, of course, but looked waterfall-like. And so if you get it, you get it. But if you didn't know the TLC song, you could see this waterfall shape and understand that there was something to do with it, maybe. But the idea always, and I've always titled them this way, is I resent that abstraction is often heaped with poetry, no offense to poetry, but this sort of like poetic, philosophical, kind of existentially filled with angst, these titles. Like, I don't think that abstract art has to be that way.
I think it's interesting that that word poetic, that in the visual art world, it doesn't have the best
No.
standing. But I don't know how it is in the world of poets. I don't think they would like to be called poetic either. You know?
It's true, it's true.
Yeah.
I just figure painting already has to do a lot now. So why heap on my philosophical belief system onto it as well? Like, why not add some sort of levity or a way in or pop cultural illusion or an anchoring in time, or sort of make it more, I hate this word because it's a little light, but playful, you know, pop culturally playful.
Yeah. And how do words come for you, Jessica, in terms of your titles?
I think I approach it in a way similar to the way I work with materials. That's a really hard question to answer, where the stuff comes from. So when I'm titling, sometimes a title just comes, but when I'm looking for a title, I work to just I write anything down, just let my mind wander. I might also flip through newspaper or magazines or books and just see what words are there and what jumps out, and then I kind of play with them together. I used to think that the titles bore no meaningful relationship to the work, and that the words didn't narrate the work. Then I made the work in Munster years ago that was called Rock Candy Mountain Grasses and Canned Sand, and it was spandex, pink spandex, that that was pulled up with kind of mountain shapes. I thought that the title bore no descriptive relationship to the work, and in retrospect, it was so clearly descriptive that I had to reevaluate my relationship to what my mind did.
That's one of my favorite pieces of yours.
Thanks. So I kind of play with the words like I do with the materials, that words are all multivalent. No word means one thing. They mean different things in relationship to each other and context, and material is the same. So I kind of play with them, looking to build something that's layered, and sometimes I talk about like as if there's lots of threads woven together, spreading out in different directions. Trying to make it a rich kind of built structure of language.
And you also got involved in the other artists' titles at MOCA.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that?
Well, you invited me to do that.
That's true. It was an open invitation. We knew what we were getting into.
Yeah. So in this show, like I also reworked the front desk a little.
Yeah.
So on the back of the front desk facing the coffee shop, there's the text that announces the show, the people in the building, the artist showing, and then I did some kind of riffed on it a little bit, kind of visually, and that then moves into some text that isn't part of that. So. That very lovely, and I must say, just a great invitation. I so appreciated that, and I've because there might not be another moment, just say I've had a great time working at MOCA with you and everybody else who helped. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you as well. Actually, and I've had the pleasure of working with both of you, so it's so nice to share this stage. On that note, I would love to the second question is actually the most basic question, which is, or maybe the most complicated question. How would you describe your practice right now in this moment?
I mean, you should go first on that one.
Well, for me, I'm at an interesting moment in life, I think, and I retired from teaching about at the end of last academic year, and moved to Nanaimo, I grew up in Vancouver, so I kind of moved back to where I came from and have some family there and friends. And the world's at a really complicated moment in all different ways. So I have over the years, like when I first started making art, I just made things. I make stuff in the studio too. I would make things. And then when I moved to Chicago in 2011, I realized I was starting to make like some series of things, which was new to me. I made a series of work called Assists, and I think some of them are here. Those are sculptures that don't stand on their own, and they need to be strapped to something else. I made a series of work with e-waste, and then I made a series of work with fixed objects, so a small object on the wall in relationship to a specific shape, which could be at different sizes. And so now I've moved, and it's a real transitional moment, and I'm working out what exactly will happen in relationship to being in Nanaimo, which is farther away from some things. Shipping's expensive. And so yes, I'm at a very, but then this invitation that you extended, this is I haven't made a big kind of installation work like this in a long time. And that I've really had all the parts of what I've been doing, I've been able to kind of weave things together. And so this is a good moment of like that's my practice at the moment. Though practice isn't a word I use a lot. I think my generation didn't use that word. We talked about our work, and practice kind of grew up around me. So there it is.
Roberta Smith condemns the use of the word.
Well, practice?
She says it's, excuse me, there's a child here, bullshit.
Yeah. I was just going to riff on that and ask, when we extended the invitation, you asked, do you want me to create an ephemeral work? And the work in MOCA is ephemeral. And I'm always curious, how do you feel about the work? It goes up, then it comes down and kind of disappears and kind of recirculates in the world of stuff that's not necessarily art. So I just wonder how your feelings maybe have stayed the same or changed around that kind of ephemeral nature of your work.
Well, I told you this story earlier. When I was younger, someone said to me, well, that's okay that you're doing that now, but when you're older, you won't be happy about the work disappearing. And I seem to find myself, fortunately, older, and I don't have any different feelings about it. I'm not really invested in the work as object somehow. I mean, I care about objects, like, if you have jewelry, it's something that you care about as an object. But I'm more interested in the work as a kind of actor in the world. It has effect on people, and on me, also. So, I guess I have very complicated feelings about that. I'm also really glad I have work that's in the world, in people's collections and museum collections, and it's a way. If I only made the work that was ephemeral, I would have a very different relationship to moving through the world and audience and having a life in relationship to the work I do. But the ephemerality of it also enables me to do things I couldn't do otherwise. The scale of what we've done at MOCA couldn't happen if it was something that was going to be kept. And if you have to think about archival issues and longevity, so there's a real freeing quality. And this piece at MOCA is also very much about the space. It's as much about that space and the experience of that architecture as it is about itself. So that also you can't do if it's something that lasts, or rarely, once in a rare while, you can do that and have it be kept.
Can I ask a technical question? So with my plexiglass sculptures, a curator early on said, well, what happens when you're dead? Like, how do these pieces live on? And I looked at Saul LeWitt's manuals and sort of wrote my own in response. For the pieces that are not ephemeral, I don't know if this is interesting to you all, but it's fascinating to me. How's the legacy of those pieces and institutions do you write install guides.
I have installation, very careful installation instructions for all of those pieces.
And can anyone install them as long as they follow? Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
And of course, I can imagine over the years, things will shift and change, and materials change. Some materials are more archival than others, and but that's an interesting thing. I mean, if the work is valued and it's cared for and changes over the years, it will be changed in relationship to lots of different, pretty interesting conversations. I've been privy to that kind of conversation with, restorers. And that's valuable all by itself, even if it becomes something different,
Yeah. I had to take the same stance because who knows if plexiglass will exist and what it will look like, exactly.
Light bulbs are a problem that way.
Light bulbs, yeah.
When I was a kid, I thought no one was thinking light bulbs were going to change, and now you can't imagine that they'll be the same.
So to be open to the fact that it could look different, and
Yeah.
And Julia, your practice?
Okay. So of late, and I know it's been traumatic lately for everyone, I've been having sort of big picture thoughts about, well, what can art do now? Or what does an art object, how does it succeed, if at all? What role does the institution play? Big things that can sometimes make making art hard. But I've been thinking a lot about differences between private and public work, not just public work out in the city, but how much I show or don't show. So, 10 years ago, my paintings are very layered. I'll build up like a very detailed, very colorful base layer, and then add layers on top that often, when the top layer is still wet, I'll go in with tools, rubber stuff, branches, stuff I find, and kind of pull away paint to reveal what's underneath. So I effectively choose what can and cannot be seen. And sometimes it's devastating because I know how much time I've put into a layer, and I take shots of every layer. And sometimes I want to go back, and you can't go back. I actually want to publish a book called The Book of Loss with all the lost paintings that I no longer have. I mean, the hope is that you end up somewhere better than you've been. But interestingly, the older I get, and maybe the more secure I get, the more open I am to showing more of, revealing more. So I had a show at Bradley or Taskirin recently where I had a painting that was 3 years in the making and had bumps and layers from all the layers that I'd put on it, all this kind of terrain of the past. And I took the tiniest brush I could find, a 00, and painted a tiny black mark on every bump that was there as a result of all the layers of paint underneath. And then this giant painting, like 10 by 12 feet, next to the painting in the gallery on a shelf was a flip book of all the previous layers underneath the painting that otherwise I think a younger version of myself wouldn't have ever shown. But the whole show is about time and memory. And so being able to stand there and take the book and sort of go back in time and see every shot that I'd taken, and some were terrible, but to reveal the terrible as part of the process. So it's like questions around like how much to reveal, how much not to reveal. And I've always played with, and this is where I think we have so much in common, but sort of responding to what's given. So finding found textiles, like when I travel, I collect rings, but I also collect textiles. So I have textiles from all around the world, and often I'll use those in my work, paint on them, paint under them, sort of use them so it's found color that you then respond to. And so all that has been at play and is still at play now, but is changing. And the pieces that, I made my mark with, the plexi pieces, I no longer make. And that was a big decision because I stopped learning from them. And I feel like, so Sean John, P. Diddy, wanted to take one of my sculptures and turn it into a perfume bottle, like a little miniature version in glass, a perfume bottle. And at the time I was like, is that the definition of selling out? P. Diddy makes a little, and then I realized, no, the definition of selling out, I think now, is continuing to do something when you're no longer like fundamentally learning anything from it. And I stopped learning from that series, and so stopped doing it. So it's just, I think, coming to terms with an evolving practice, This is why I'm so fascinated by, you created this enormous, it's one piece on the first floor of MOCA, and all these beautiful component parts that you can see from so many different angles, and they have so much interesting like interplay between them, and yet you're still pushing to do these new, there's video work in there. I went in this morning and I said, I'm so sorry, I don't know about your video practice. I felt like embarrassed, like I have this void in my knowledge. I know a lot about her and her work. I'm so embarrassed. And she said,
Well, I've never made video before.
right? So I was just like, oh my God, thank God. But it's amazing, especially in relationship to the work that you've done to date and the work you've now done for MOCA, which, thank you, it's amazing. But just like what it means to be an artist who has been working for a while and how that practice evolves. I don't know if I answered a question, but that's sort of what's going on.
You did, and you sparked new questions as
Okay.
well. Although this one we kind of discussed a little bit, but it jumps a few, but that's okay. I wanted to ask about planning and intuition. In various kind of interviews and outlets, you both have talked about this kind of dance or reconciliation between how to plan, rules, and then the unknown. So I'm curious how you dance this dance when you're making work, because both of you work ephemerally, actually.
Well, we talked when I visited your studio about the word intuition. I think it's an uncomfortable word because there's a kind of implication that you don't know what you're doing, that it's distinct from intellectual life. There's that implication in that word. And I think that there are lots of different ways of knowing things, and that making things is an opportunity to access the different ways in which the mind works. And that the word intuition, really, it's kind of about that, about different ways of knowing that exist inside of a person that you haven't put into words. And words can't really describe everything. I think you can't. I think it's a mistake to say that you can't put words to something. You can make an effort to put words to anything, but the words are distinct from that thing and distinct from other ways of knowing and from making. I mean, visual art is interesting and important to look at because it does something that words don't do, even if words intersect, and influence the thing also. So for me, there's a process of like trying to access all those different parts of the way my mind works and the way, why I want to make anything anyway. And sort of like, so there has to be room to be uncomfortable, move things around, bump into things, like I include serendipity. I mean, none of us exist alone or in outer space. We exist in a particular place with particular things and objects and ways of thinking that are around us, expressed in all different ways. So I think the making of things is a way to kind of take stock of and understand all those things. So I have like ways of kind of groups of ideas and things that are steady throughout that I am interested in my work. And then it's an effort to, like you said, not to be repeating oneself all the time, and just, though there's nothing wrong with that if somebody finds a nice thing and makes a nice, that's a different ambition in the world. Yeah. But yeah, I'm like interested in opening up questions and trying to like pull the rug out from myself and experience the things freshly. Even though you can't dispense with the bracket that you grew up with, were taught, etc. You can't stop being that. So planning, comes from the past in some way, and then leaving room for a kind of present unfolding that can't be predicted seems important to me.
Yeah, same. Actually, can we go back one slide? For planning and non-planning.
Oh yeah, could we go back one slide? Is
Diptych.
that possible?
Sort of be, maybe it was 2. The broken nose, unbroken nose.
Oh yeah, further back.
The one that looks like colorful bacon. But this is,
Here
we
we
talked
go.
about, yeah. So this is a good example of my painting work. I was going to say practice.
Say practice.
So the painting on the left, the underpainting is a very detailed composition of hard edge abstraction of fruit, like different fruit, that I then kind of went over and did my thing with the, pulled away the black paint as the top layer, pulled away to reveal underneath. So that was very planned, the underpainting, but then very unplanned, intuitive, if you will, to find the painting that I wanted. And then it's a diptych. So this one is the first time I've ever done this. So I went through and peeled away every, as my husband calls them, colorful piece of bacon, peeled them away, recreated them, and then lay them all out flat and sort of print it. So it's totally unplanned in a way, and then very much planned. So like dissected it, reprinted it, and then they were sort of hung together. So they became a diptych. That to me is a really nice play for myself between the poles of wanting to control, but then also wanting to find this space where you're actually seeing something you have never seen before. And I think that's the beauty and relates to the first question, like words we've seen before. And the magic of it, I think still, even though it's very hard, is that you're creating something or seeing something in space that has not existed in its form. And that's really, I don't know, when a painting's finished, the only way, and I'm very wordy, the only way I know it's finished is I get this weird weakness in my knees, and I know it's done and I can't touch anything else. Like that is not smart at all. I mean, that's just stupid.
It's nice you have something so clear.
It's like a
Yeah,
physical.
it's so physical.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, but it's the thing. Like I don't know. It's a thing I can't explain. My MO has always been making is thinking, so I don't plan. I don't plan the paintings other than knowing what a composition underneath I might want it to be, but I don't sort of draw it out in advance and then make it a real painting after. I sort of find it as I'm doing it, which I think we share in common. But it's that idea, if you're a writer, some writers, I don't know if, Rui, you find this when you write, but you don't know what you think until you see what you say. It's a famous Ian Forster quote, like you find your way through the articulation, and that means you surprise yourself. And I feel like if you don't surprise yourself, there's just no point.
I think also in relationship to that question about process for this show, the process was a really lovely one where, I was invited to do something in the space and talk to you about the space a little. And then Maxwell Galley made a SketchUp of the space, and I made drawings that he could then translate into that space. And then in conversation with you and Max and Warren, there was a lot of process that happened there in those conversations because they had a lot of information about materials here and how they could build things, because this show was far past what I could do all by myself, so I relied on a lot of collaboration with everybody. And so that process was really lovely. Everybody, all three of you had ideas, and you questioned my title. You brought, and I said, well, no, I was going to keep that title. But there were lots of things.
It's grown on me.
Yeah. But there were lots of, well, you actually brought with you questions from other people, to be fair to you. Yes.
It's true.
And, but there were lots of things and questions and thoughts that you all contributed that thought, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, and so it was a kind of collaborative process of thinking that happened over some time before I got here. So process happens in lots of different ways. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But even materially speaking, I mean, you have this beautiful way of describing how you use mass-produced, unassuming, everyday objects because there's other minds in the room. Someone else has designed that thing, has chosen that blue, that form has a utilitarian function, but if you turn it, it all of a sudden might be something else, or it may just be what it is, but it's in this space now. And I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit about the other minds in the room in terms of like materiality.
Well, I'm really interested in just in general that in our Western art world, the aim is to be original and make something that hasn't been done before. And actually none of us think alone. I think visual artists who, with a studio practice, we like to spend a fair amount of time alone. It's like a decision to not be like in theater, but to be rather in the studio. But the things that I make, how I compose things, it's in concert with many, many other people, art history that I've seen. And then the materials are also designed by people, and there's a history of design. And the tables, we used a bunch of tables. I mean, they were made, in this case, by factories. And most of what's around us now is not made by an individual, but rather by factories. But somebody designed those things, and they're made in some place. So all those materials bring with them other people. And I'm interested, and then physically and visually, I'm interested in framing and where the edge of something is. So that's like resonates metaphorically with like all these people, what our togetherness or apartness, and being an artist and sharing work in the world doesn't happen alone. I mean, all these people help make the thing happen. And the older I get, the more I realize that. I mean, when you're young, I think you have to be an artist, kind of narcissistic and kind of, stupidly, think you're great. You have to think you're great. You can't keep going otherwise. And then the older you get, you realize just how many people contribute. And so that matters to me a lot, yeah.
Julia, any thoughts on that?
Thoughts on how amazing Jessica is?
Yeah.
I was just thinking. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to naturally move into this question about collaboration.
I thought so. That's why I was letting you go.
Okay. So, both of you are huge collaborators, and Jessica, there are many exhibitions. We have two examples here. Actually, this has come at a perfect time, where when you're invited to do a group show, you have then actually extended the invitation for other artists to show alongside you. And I kind of wonder why and kind of how that's figured in your practice. In your work.
I think that, though the first time I did that, I think was at Gorny Braven Lee Gallery. I had a show called Tabletop Sculpture, and I'd noticed that my work for many years, well, I started as a painter, and the work kind of grew off the wall, and it grew, then knocked the walls down sometimes, and moved into the room, and, it started to envelop space from the picture plane. And in that show, I was asking myself, well, do my works need the wall? Like, could I do something that isn't in relationship with the wall? And the wall, being in relationship with the wall, is a kind of dependence. A painting needs a wall to hang on. And so in the tabletop sculpture show, I made a fair amount of work that wasn't against the wall, which was odd for me and continues to be a little odd. And alongside of that, I invited a group of people to be in the show with me, to have a kind of small show inside of my show, because I was recognizing my dependence on these other people as equivalent to the work's dependence on architecture. And so there were people in the show who, like my cousin was in the show, people who I didn't know, but very famous people. Cindy Sherman I'd never met, she was in the show. And then people I did know, and and former students of mine, and teachers. So I was asking so that's where the first kind of collaboration came from. And then Ian Barry invited me at Saratoga Springs at the Tang Gallery to co-curate a show with him. And so that show ended up being, I kind of designed the infrastructure. And kind of like this show at MOCA, where does infrastructure become sculpture? So there was a group, and that show ended up being, kind of in the New York City orbit. It was on the edge of New York City, and he and I both knew a lot of people. It was a kind of people we knew. And he worked very much as we're describing our process. He, as a curator, his process was a very fluid, organic process, that we didn't start with some theory about what the bracket was. we kind of thought together, talked about different artists, and it kind of accumulated. And then this show, the photographs we had here, that was in Turin at a place called OGR. That was during the pandemic. I never saw that show because we couldn't travel. And there I designed the infrastructure and was invited to curate a painting show from 2 collections, so one a collection in Turin and the other in Barcelona. And so it was mostly painting. There was a little stuff in there that was kind of painterly sculpture, but there I was thinking about the circle and the square in relationship to the content of those paintings. A lot of them, some of them abstract, some of them not, and then kind of took that into the design of the exhibition, and so this show is called. What is it called?
The squared circle ringing.
Yeah, the squared circle ringing. And that show ended up having a wrestling ring in it. And this show...
2, actually.
Yeah.
One is an image and one is
a
sculpture.
No, the show...
Oh, sorry, cut a rug, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so this one has the 2.
Yeah.
Half a wrestling ring and an image. Yeah. But anyway, there's more, but you know. And for you, a collaboration?
Yeah, it's a little different for me. I'm not as generous with my exhibition space. My collaboration seems to extend outside of my studio. So I'd call it a fashion project called Signs Point to Yes with an artist in New York who's a great friend, an amazing photographer named Hannah Whitaker. So we make very limited, hand-painted artist, kind of fancy sweats, we call them. So we do that sort of together, and it's really nice to have something else other than being alone in the studio and working, because we have to agree, and I'm not used to that, being someone who typically works alone. But then I've done it. Actually, my interest in fashion, has existed for forever. But my first collaboration was with Jeremy Lang, an amazing designer. His line is now defunct because slow fashion is impossible to sustain financially. He's now an amazing visual artist. He invited me to collaborate with him a few years ago, and we sort of selected paintings of mine and then he transformed them into these amazing dresses and shirts, and he was in New York Fashion Week. And then interestingly, I was, hanging out at home watching Schitt's Creek, and Alexis was wearing one of the dresses. Blew my mind, because we had no idea that it happened. So who knows where collaborations can go,
That must have been thrilling.
It was amazing. It was amazing. So yeah, I enjoy collaborations. And then teaching, I used to teach in New York. I feel like teaching is a really significant collaboration. And I run this thing called Hot Pizza now, which definitely is a collaboration. And I think community always comes from that. And it's been really, really fulfilling, so.
And speaking of community, you both have taken on MOCA's ground floor in very different ways, which is it's kind of the hub of the museum. We have offices there, we have a cafe, we have bathrooms, we have a lot of different uses and a lot of action. And I wonder how you both approached it, and the architecture, and all of that activity in both of your projects.
You can start.
Me? So it's funny because November Painter in Rui said to me, this is GTA 21. GTA is the triennial sort of like artist, I don't know, you describe it. But it was a great kind of group exhibition. And they said to me, Julia, you can handle this space. Go. Like, have this space, do whatever you want in it. And it's a hard space. There's giant columns, so many ways in, so many doors and access points and bathrooms. And it's sort of like, so I sat there. I don't know if you had to do this. I sat there for like many days trying to feel the space and see what would work. And at the time, I was also interested in public art and ideas of access. So what does it mean to access art when it's not in a white cube of a commercial gallery, when it's not in the institution that you have to cross a threshold to feel accepted into, to see, what would it mean to make art in the public realm, which is a few pieces, I think, that have been floating by, has become a real interest of mine, that you stumble upon, work out, which is a whole other interesting conversation about how you make art in the public realm. But the space is so high traffic, and this idea of access is really key. And I thought, what would it mean to have a piece that was physically accessible on that ground floor? So I don't know if you saw, there's a slide with these giant curtains that I did, and one was this image that I've coveted for about 25 years and have never been able to use, of a girl's face with she'd just popped a bubblegum balloon and the gum's all over her face, which is one of the images. And one was a huge, like a blow up of a painting of mine, and the painting happened to be also upstairs. So then the idea of memory and recollection, like, would you recognize something from downstairs once you got upstairs? Don't know. A lot of people did, but that, you didn't have to. So you could choose what you wanted to see as a viewer. There's also a giant crystal. And so viewers were invited, and it was really funny to say, like, the docents were there. People would say, like, are you sure? Can I touch this? It's like, yes, you can. And so you could draw a curtain to choose what it was that you actually wanted to see. And so the piece never ended. It was interactive in a way, but the idea that you could participate and choose inside a museum what ultimately you wanted to put on display was one way of dealing with that space. And then also I had a wall where we hired a wheat pasting poster company to come in, and I had taken a painting of mine, made posters of it, and this amazing guy came in and wheat pasted the wall with posters of the painting that was then hung on the wall with all the posters. It's this idea of, like, what can you do in these spaces to make them, I think, more accessible? Yeah.
Well, I think I thought about it as, was very aware of the complexity of the space and the traffic, the two doors, back door, front door, windows on both sides. So it is a challenging space in that it's not a white cube, and if you try to pretend it is, it doesn't go too well. I kind of made the work about that quality of the space. And I think it's most often, almost perhaps always the case in my work, that the work is about moving around and putting together different points of view. So in a way, it's a little bit filmic in that regard, that the memory of having been in from another point of view enters the view that you're standing in. And picture making is a kind of, so there's a picture-making quality to the work. So when you talk about curtains moving, I'm thinking in my work an equivalence might be moving around and having these different points of view that accumulate as different pictures, like film presents you with different pictures. And I talked earlier about, like, well, there's all this stuff, and in addition to all the different activities, there's all this stuff on the walls. There's fire warrant, things, and signs, and all the
Vents.
But I feel like most artists just ignore that, or they pretend it's not there, but you, like, really used it.
This work, I really got interested in all of that stuff, yeah. There's another artist, Nora Schultz, who I saw her work in Münster, and whose work does that, enters the space, like, really cognizant of all the kind of practical activity in it in that way. And I sort of felt like I was channeling her work a little bit. So, yeah.
I also read this great thing about your work, and I don't know if it resonates for you, but that you don't transform space, you occupy it.
And I don't make environments.
Yeah.
I don't, I'm interested in the line, a blurry line between the thing that I put in the space and the space. I don't want to erase the space. And I think that comes from the picture-making attitude I have. I mean, a painting has a frame. We understand painting has a frame around it. But paintings rely on a particular context. They get hung on a wall at a particular height, and the wall, we've assumed for a long time that the wall's white, but it doesn't need to be. And so having then asking questions about the frame, I don't put actual physical frames about my work around the work, but walls are rectilinear, and they frame they frame the painting hanging on the wall, they frame us in the space moving around. So there's, all of those questions about framing and the kind of subtlety of the actual physical framing is metaphoric for thinking, because we can't think about everything at once. And how we focus our thoughts is a kind of inside of a frame, a conceptual frame. And the nature of that frame impacts what the world looks like to us. And that framing of question is in relation, exists in relation to science. How scientists propose their experiment and frame the questions they're asking has everything to do with what they'll find. So I'm interested in that in so many ways, and this space, the MOCA space, it's a kind of a hallway in a way, it's like it's this fluid, there's a lot of movement in there. And I really love the moments like looking into the kitchen of the cafe from the space, I think is really beautiful. And then there's, those windows in front of the kitchen frame that activity. And keep it separate from you in the art space, even while your vision can move through. Yeah, I think the negative space in there in relationship to my work is as important as the things I put in there.
And you've brought in some very powerful geometry into the space, and kind of to go full circle, the squared circle ringing
Yes.
is also very geometric, and it's also very public. And so I'm curious if maybe before we go to the Q&A, if you want to share some thoughts on those words.
Well, the squared circle is historically related to wrestling and boxing, I think. I don't think there's an exact moment historically, but trying to figure it out. I think the title came to me from researching, kind of just Googling, trying to figure out what resonances there are with squares and circles, and came across that. And but then geometry is, well, I love minimalism, and I think minimalism as a art movement opened up space for the work I do, even if my work doesn't look minimal, because they didn't use a pedestal, and they implicated the space that we stand in and opened up all this space in the room as charged. So my work exists there, and grids are really important in art history, but also just in life. I mean, the rooms we're in are mostly rectilinear, or they might be circular. Grids and rectilinear packaging is economical. Building materials are geometrical because it makes sense economically. So the way in which we have developed, we're just like meshed with geometry all the time. And so I was like, in the concrete poetry things I put in the show, there's a lot of like layers of like just resonance, like how geometry can be meaningful. So I kind of explored it with words a little bit, and I explored it physically in the space. And I think it has something to do with order, too. Geometry helps to order things. You used the word control at one point, talking about your work. And I think how we control ourselves, life, everybody has control issues of one kind or another. And I think art is, you can always look at it through that lens of control.
It's amazing, though, because when I think about the piece that you've done for us at MOCA, there is this sort of and you'll see when you go, this like hard edge abstraction, these very decisive lines, but that once you're in the space and you start to look a little bit more, you'll see, like if you continue up this great red, brownish, earth tony, like triangle, you look at the top, and there's a whole part that's just not painted. Like you would feel like it should go all the way, like you want it to go all the way, it doesn't. Or like the screen, you want it to be level with the vent that it's next to, it's not. So there's all this like perfect sort of like a rub that's fascinating to me, because it's unexpected. Like it's almost there, but it's intentionally not. Of course it's intentionally not. It's so interesting. Yeah. Details.
They're important. So should we open it up to questions?
Sure.
Yeah. We're gonna.
Should we change the lighting a little so we
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we
the
kind of
audience?
maybe play a little bit with the light? We're gonna bring it
Thanks.
down just a little bit. And we have some mics on either side of the aisle for anyone with questions. Oh, there's a question just...
Heather has a question.
Oh,
Heather
yeah.
Diak.
There we go.
Hi, thank you. Is this on? You can't, oh, there it is. Ooh. Both of you have such a wide-ranging embrace of materials. And so I'm wondering if you could say something about, your own relationship to those materials. I mean, they are in each of your practices and changing over time, how you, work with the life of those materials, how you see them, this kind of dynamic.
Well, I don't have a kind of sentimental or, I wouldn't use the word relationship. Though I don't mean to, your question is very clear. And yes, I have a relationship to materials. I use them and think about them, et cetera. But the other meanings of the word relationship, like it's not like a friendship. At some level, I could use any materials. I use materials that are in the world, and I have something to do that's in relationship to material in a more general way. But then I also think through the process of making things over the years, I became much more interested in materials, what they are, where they came from. And right now, the material landscape that is so different than it was 30 years ago. Everything's made of plastic. There's plastic in our clothes are plastic. Plastic is cheap, and people struggle financially, and the landscape is full of this strange material. So I'm just struck by that at the moment. The quality of the surface of the material landscape that we're in, it feels really sad to me, and painful, because we also know that everything's going to the dump, and we know that the plastic is a problem. And at the same time, I think of myself and artists generally and people as kind of like magpies, like shiny things attract us and make us happy. And pleasure is a big, we didn't talk about pleasure.
Let's talk about pleasure.
And beauty and stuff like that. Pleasure and beauty is part of art and part of being human, that people want those things, and that I think that those things make life easier to live. And I certainly find pleasure in, shiny plastic, even while I know that plastic is a problem. And I guess part of the pain of the landscape, though, is that individual skill and craft is sort of not part of the general making of things very often anymore. I could keep talking a long time, but it's like so my relationship to materials is myriad, goes in lots of different directions.
I like to use a term called material reciprocity, which sounds a little BS-y, but it means like I'm attracted to materials like with the plexi, the very plastic pieces that I do, where I am a magpie, because you're faced with this amazing, brilliant, plasticky found color. But what am I physically capable of doing as a human? And how does the material respond? So with that whole series, I like to see the sculptures as the exact meeting point between my force and it. And the rule was always, because they're just tethered to the wall with screws, and they're sort of balanced, and they're like 9 feet tall. The rule was always that if during an exhibition the material were to win in that balance, in that relationship, that it would just have to lie there like a splayed piece. It never happened and has yet to happen. But the idea then would be that the material would have won in that battle. So the sort of what can you do to a thing and how does it respond, I think is how I approach a lot of the materials that I work with, whether it's textiles and draping over the surface of a canvas, or even paint and how I can pull it or not off a surface, or yeah, sort of like how do you see yourself and your force reflected in that equilibrium of the material relationship?
Hi, thank you so much. Enjoyed hearing your stories. I'm wondering, as very seasoned and sophisticated artists, that specifically being asked to do a project in that very unique MOCA space, if you have found, even with all your experience, that this has pushed you as an artist in unexpected ways. And is that good or bad? To like, how does it feel to be out of the white cube and to something that is as idiosyncratic as that main floor of the MOCA space?
I've worked in a lot of idiosyncratic spaces because because people invite me to, for I guess obvious
Because you can
reasons.
handle it.
Yeah.
You can handle it.
I mean, for me, for some reason, this was one of the most pleasurable installs I've had. Maybe it's because I'm not teaching anymore and life is a bit more relaxed. I don't know. I mean, discovering new things and being like, I don't know about if pushed is the right word. I mean, the invitation, it was just a kind of pleasure to have the opportunity to engage the space. I mean, when I'm invited to do work in spaces, I don't spend time thinking about whether it's a really beautiful space or not. I can work, you know, I care about beauty and pleasure in my work, but the space doesn't have to be a beautiful space to enable that. And it just so happens that I think this space is a really beautiful space, and I enjoyed it, you know, a lot.
The first question I asked you when I met you was, do you love the columns or do you hate the columns? And you were like, I love the columns, as I did too.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was really a lovely challenge. And I'd wanted to do a big curtain piece. I'd had it sort of roughly in my mind for many years, but hadn't had the right space to do it in. So when I realized sitting in that space and trying to figure out how to handle it, it was an amazing opportunity. Also using, in my install, I used both sides of the wall, the piece where I had the wheat paster. It was we actually went into Kathleen's office, which is the other side of the wall, and installed on that wall because you can see when you come into MOCA, there's glass, so you can see into Kathleen's office, and she very generously let me also do the other side of the wall. So just like, that's insane. I mean, when in an institution are you able to like go into the director's office and also complete, you know, two halves of the whole?
But also, ever since then, we now install work on that wall as a result. And even with you, Jessica, kind of reimagining our front desk, I can't actually imagine it any other way. And so part of these invitations are that you also receive gifts, these lasting gifts from artists as well, in terms of you learn something about the space through your eyes. And even the artist that I first worked with at MOCA was Carlos Bunga. And he went into the stairwell and he said, the acoustics in here are amazing. Well, that's how the sound series started. So it really has been through the idiosyncrasy of the space, but also the artist's response that has revealed and given us these incredible gifts at the museum that we also just kind of keep pushing. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, a mic is just coming for you. Yeah.
Just curious if you ended up making the perfume with P. Diddy.
I decided at the time that that was the definition of selling out, so I said no.
I don't think it matters if you sell
It
it.
doesn't matter now. I mean, now we know what happened to him, though, so I'm relieved, right?
Yes, a question here in the front, in the fourth row.
Jessica, wondering, when you work a lot with architectural structures that are, in a way, given to you and then you have to work with them. And during the COVID, you were writing poetry, but you were writing poetry in response to some strict structures. And I don't think we've ever talked about this, but I'm wondering if you could say or elaborate on what it's like working with the poetic structure and architectural structure. I mean, where do they resonate and where are they different? And I also just want to note that, as far as I can recall, this show is the first show where you've actually put quite a bit of writing and poetics in the installation. And yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
That question comes from my husband. Patrick Chamberlain, lovely person.
Great artist, great artist.
Very good artist, too, yeah. Yes, it's true. That when I first started writing poetry during the pandemic, I had a book that described the different structure of different poems, the villanelle, that's what, a sonnet, and it was a kind of challenge to use language in a way that kind of did the thing that it's supposed to do, the right number of syllables, the cadence, that where you put the stress on things. And that was really interesting, and really interesting that poetry has that. You know, visual art, we don't have such strict forms. We have form and lots of ways to talk about it and history of form, but in poetry, they still exist, these forms that a person, it's like a math problem with language. And I really enjoyed doing that. And maybe we'll do it again, I don't know. But it's true, I never thought about it as analogous to architecture. And architecture has form. And it'd be interesting if we had an architect here who, you know, could speak to that, whether there's an equivalency in some way one could think about the strictness of the poetic form. Of course, no one has to adhere to the poetic form, and contemporary poetry tends not to, but it exists as a model and things.
Because architects have to adhere to the physics and gravity of form.
There's the laws of the nature thing, but there's also I think architects spend a lot of time adhering to production, ways of production, because cost is associated with that too. And then, yeah, I have never put text on the wall in the way that I've done here. I don't know how I will see. I mean, I haven't actually seen it all stuck on the wall yet. We had it placed just before I left today, and tomorrow I'll see it. I'm curious where that will take me. A lot of the texts on the wall are kind of at a scale where they resonate with the other little bits and pieces of signage and hardware on the walls. And yeah,
See, nothing is random,
Yeah.
right? I love that.
Yeah. I'm really excited about that for some reason, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
So one final question, yeah.
Hi, I followed your career for quite a long time from a distance, so I'm looking forward to seeing this at MOCA, Jessica. Every time I've seen your work in an art magazine, which is the only place I've seen it, I'm always struck with, oh my God, that's remarkable, and it's very much you, the colors, the 3D. The question is, are you aware that you have an amazing ability to compose? It's the composition for me. It's like looking at Modrin, and you're like, oh my God, how he put together those three primaries and the white and the black lines. I mean, just a spectacular ability at composition. So that's what I would put at your career.
Well, thank you. I do love composition. And I think that I started as a painter, and I think people all kind of have proclivities that you might be born with to be more of a painter or a sculptor. Our son, we have a son, he never cared about painting as much as dimensional objects. And I though he does love Patrick's paintings a lot. He talks about them. I think that I don't have a ready access to three-dimensional thinking. I have a ready access to compositional graphic thinking, and then I find out things about space by acting. And so when to do a piece like at MOCA, I start by coming to see the space when things are going well, and then having a floor plan and elevations, which are flat things, help me to work out the dimensions and spatial arrangements. And though the work is sculptural, it doesn't stay in the history of painting. It moves into sculpture also. It's organized in relationship to pictorial thinking, so a kind of planar thinking. The assist pieces that I made are really on the edge of what I've done, in that they don't have a relationship to architecture, but they are kind of made with planar elements that curve in different directions and then attach to an object. And that intersects your observation, I would say. Thanks.
Okay, maybe one more. Is there one more? Yeah.
Hi. Jessica, again, a question for you. I was already wanting to ask more about the wrestling boxing ring and what its resonance was, and I realized I don't know anything about like this squared circle reference at all, so that makes me even more curious about that relationship. And I mean, you've always had a really distinct way of working with horizontal surfaces, whether they were flat on the floor or ramps or platforms, and some of them we can access. And it seems to me they really imply the human body, our relationship to that surface, whether we're allowed to walk on it or not, either because they're rugs or platforms. But I'm wondering if you could talk more about, because they're much more, when they become platforms with access or without access, they become much more about, human drama, human movement, changes in perspective. They seem much more specific, and I'm just curious about that evolution.
So that question comes from Ilana Herzog, whose show at the Koffler right now I was the curator of. And the word, I'd say what does curator mean? I would say I was an interlocutor, and that we worked together and in installing that. And I've known Ilana for many years. How many years? Like maybe 40. Yeah. So thank you for that question. Yes, I've used, it's true, a lot of platforms. This one you can't walk on because code won't allow people to enter that kind of a structure here. And perhaps it might be used for some events that people could be on. And yes, the floor, the different surfaces, the floor, and then you raise the floor and it can be a walkway or a stage. And I've sort of played with that a little bit in the language that I've included in the show. And you can be, when you're on the stage, your view, here we are on the stage, people look at us. But then it also can be a viewing platform that, like you said, alters your point of view. So it calls attention to viewing. And then there's an essay, Art and Objecthood, by Michael Fried, that I read that years ago and I couldn't understand it at all. And read it, then read it later on in life. And it's an essay in which he rails against the theatricality of art that minimalism opened up space for, as I kind of pointed to before. And he does a beautiful job of articulating how that theatricality exists in relationship to looking at things in art galleries and museums. And of course, he lost that battle. Art became extraordinarily theatrical, and in all kinds of ways. And I think that those, like, how the viewer is part of the work and separate from the work is really always interesting. And in the show at MOCA, I think it will be a really different experience full of people, or when you're there alone. And we are all, like, in public. That's also the private-public question you were asking. When you look at something collectively as part of a public, it's kind of a performative position to be in relationship to the work, and very different than like a small painting when you're just if that's just between you and that experience of the painting, or when you have things in your home. So yeah, it's true. I've used that kind of horizontal picture plane a lot. It's another kind of picture plane. Yeah.
Cool. I think we're going to end it there. Thank you both so much for your contributions
Thank
tonight.
you.
And thank you all for coming and for your questions.